So the first question that we have for you, I suppose your party's advocating for a no vote in the upcoming referendum on the fiscal treaty. And what impact do you feel that no vote will have for young people aged 16 to 25?
I think the vote is probably most important for younger people in exactly that age bracket, because if you look over the last number of years, since 2008 for instance, unemployment rates in this state have doubled. We have huge levels of youth unemployment, we have a huge level now again, sadly, of forced emigration. And I think the people who have the highest stake in this debate are actually young people, some of whom won't even get to vote on it. Principally why we're arguing for a no vote is because we can see the evidence over the last number of years in Ireland and across the continent of a failed policy. A policy that's led to, for instance, 50% youth unemployment in Greece, a similar situation in Spain. And very simply we say when you establish that your policy isn't working, and that's the case here in this state, you have to change it. That's what politics is all about. So the no vote is not a rejection of Europe, it's not a rejection of the euro as our currency, but it is a democratic demand for a change in policy and a move away from what's called austerity, which means cutbacks and hacking away at services in the economy, and to move very firmly onto the path of investment in jobs and in growth. And the strange thing is, meanwhile this treaty is being debated here in this country, the game has moved on. It's moved on in France, it's moved on even in Germany, and there's a recognition that hacking and cutting and cutting and hacking isn't going to work, isn't going to get our young people back to work, isn't going to give people opportunities to make their lives and have their future here in Ireland. We want that to change, and that's what the no vote is all about. The French went to the polls recently and elected a new president, a man by the name of Francois Hollande. He's refusing to ratify this treaty, and it's not for him a matter of timing. He's saying, if you listen to what he says, that this does not contain measures for growth, for investment and for jobs. And for that reason, he is still in negotiations and conversations with, for instance, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, who herself can't manage to get this treaty through the Bundestag because politicians in Germany, and if we're to go by recent elections in Germany, the people too recognise that the austerity strategy isn't working. So here in Ireland we're having our debate, but it's very much connected to the economic and political realities right across the Union. And you know, what's good for us is good for our partners in the European Union because we trade with them. Not alone will the cutbacks and that kind of policy affect services and people's quality of life here in this state and keep the domestic economy, as it's called, on the floor. It'll also have an effect right across the European Union, and of course they're the very places that we want to trade with, that we want to export to. So in economic terms, what we've had is a strategy that's about cutbacks and contraction, taking money and resources out of the economy. That served to deepen the recession. So that's not what we want. We all want stability and security and so on. And the way to achieve that is by investment, led by the respective governments and states, that re-inflates the economy and actually gets people back to work. We need a shock. It's almost like kick-starting, if you like, the economy again. And that's a really urgent thing. I mean, I'm very conscious, you know, as a public representative, just how tough it is for an awful lot of people, for people who maybe for the first time are reliant on the welfare system. You know, this term that they use now, the coping classes. People who would always have worked, who maybe have studied very hard, who not so long ago were managing fine and now find themselves personally in a deep, deep crisis. And it's not good enough for us to give the rhetoric of growth. We need the reality of it, and that means a change in policy, and that means on the 31st of May rejecting this treaty.
What will bring the country back on its feet? So you said a move away from austerity, but what for you and for Sinn Féin, what will work to bring Ireland back up on its feet?
Two things. First off, investment. And we've identified as a sort of like, if you like, an initial intervention, a package of 13 billion euros. Now that's a lot of money, but believe it or not, we can put our hands on it here through the National Pension Reserve Fund, which I'm sure people have heard a lot about. through finance from the European Investment Bank, through leveraging the resources of private pension funds. We need to put together that kind of pot, investment pot, and pump it into the economy as a matter of urgency. And it, by the way, it's to go into constructive things like improving our infrastructure. Broadband, for instance, there's a direct relationship around the speed of your broadband and your GDP, in other words, your productivity and what you produce. We all know that we still need schools and primary healthcare centres and so on. We need to stop hearing politicians talking about that, and we need to put together that fund and do it. We also need to deal with the issue of the debt burden that we have. Now, I'm very disappointed at the fact that we have a government that nearly wear as a badge of honour the fact that they haven't dealt with the issue of the debt, the private banking debt in particular, that we're lumbered with. And again, I think if you look at a European Union level, the level of debt is such, with Spain now, for instance, teetering on the brink, and with some rumblings coming from the likes of Cyprus, that we're all encumbered with debt that we cannot pay. And in the case of here, this jurisdiction wasn't our debt to begin with, so that has to be dealt with. The preferable thing is that it's done multilaterally, that it's done at a European level, but we should not be putting money into paying off the promissory note. Our money should not be going into the clapped out Anglo-Irish Bank, and that's another issue that we need to deal with. And then over the longer term, so if you like, those are kind of an absolutely immediate thing, along with it in terms of the banking debt. But then over the longer term, we need taxation reform. I mean, we want services in the state that have to be paid for, and the taxes have to be levied in a way that's fair and that's progressive. So as short-term measures, for instance, we've suggested in this time of crisis that we look at a higher tax band of 48% income tax, but only on individual earnings over €100,000. That's not going to solve our problems, but it's an additional amount of money into the pot. So what I want to say is this: I'm not pretending, and Sinn Féin's not pretending, that there is a magic wand to make all of this go away. I wish there was. There aren't any soft options here, but there are choices. And the choice to be made is around that investment package, is around seriously politically dealing with the issue of debt, and then over the longer term setting in place the building blocks so that we don't walk ourselves into the kind of blind alley that we're in again. We need to actually learn from this crisis. This state has been through crises before, and you wonder when you look around now whether or not people in politics and people in senior positions actually learned the lessons from them.
There's a big campaign at the moment in Ireland from young people 16 to 18 to lower that franchise to 16-year-olds. So what we wanted to ask you was, do you think young people under the legal age to vote at the moment should be consulted in relation to these constitutional amendments that have the potential to have a long-term impact on their lives?
The answer to that is yes, and I would go further and say that I actually support, and we as a party support, lowering the age of franchise. I think it's long overdue. In the interim, just to say that the government is proposing to have a constitutional convention. Now, we're not exactly sure the precise terms of reference or when it's going to kick off. I think this issue of the voting age has to be dealt with in that forum, and I think it would be a bit of a nonsense, for instance, to discuss making that change and not having the voice of young people very much engaged in that process. So I think we need to clear spaces on the issue of the voting age, but then on all of the other issues, whether it's around the concept of marriage in Ireland, whether it's around, you know, writing into the constitution social and economic rights, you know, that can be vindicated through the law. All of that, I think young people have a particular stake in and should have their place in. In the short term, we need to campaign for a lowering of that age, and certainly I would encourage young people to heap the pressure on government in particular to make sure that they're part and parcel of that constitutional convention.
Are young people considered when TDs and politicians are making these decisions and developing policies? Is that something in the back of your mind and your colleagues' mind when they're making policy decisions or plotting their way through what's happening?
Well, it certainly is in mine, and I would really hope, in fairness to all of my colleagues, whatever side of this debate they're on, that it's in their minds as well. I mean, speaking personally, I have young children, I'm very, very conscious of the fact that particularly now, the decisions, big decisions that are taken now will impact on me, but they'll impact far more on them. And that's just a reality. I think one of the problems that we have is probably the political system doesn't have a structured way in which young people, in a participative way, kind of play their part. I've mentioned the Constitutional Convention already, but I think on an ongoing basis, I know you have things like Dáil na nÓg and other initiatives, but I think they only capture quite a limited number of people. So I think we need to be a bit creative in terms of how we do our business in the Oireachtas and indeed at local authority level, and partnering with voluntary organisations, community organisations, to see if we can establish some kind of network that's on a semi-formal footing that gives young people an input or some level of influence or even contact with policymakers and decision makers, because very often you're in the Dáil and it is a bubble. It is unquestionably, and sometimes you have insiders talking to each other, and I mean maybe arguably, you know, this notion of groupthink around our banks and why the whole thing went wallop was identified as a crucial thing. So I think we need to open up the system to allow that level of participation. I don't have the answer for you, I don't have it worked out in my head, and I would prefer if young people themselves, you know, were to come forward with the proposition, and then for policymakers and decision makers to take that on board. I mean, it's not beyond our wish to straighten that one out.
Okay. The last general question we have for you is, many young people have said that they're confused and not sure how to vote, which I suppose is part and parcel of any kind of... Yeah, exactly. That's the nature of a political campaign, those messages coming out. But the question that young people wanted to ask was, what do you feel as a decision maker, as a representative, feel you can do to make sure that you keep young people engaged and informed? Is there any particular thing that you think you can do to ensure that they're kept in the loop?
I think that social media have really opened things up for politicians, whatever their age group, in particular to engage and to make contact with younger people. So I'm a Facebooker. Now, I'm a fairly recent convert to it, but I find it very useful in general. But most particularly when you're dealing with people that kind of younger age group, Twitter, all of those things I think are extremely useful. But you know what? There's no substitute for an individual citizen, a young citizen, taking it upon themselves to actually come looking for the likes of me. I mean, I have offices in my constituency and in the Dáil. I'm speaking for myself now, but I think I can fairly say it for other politicians. We're not that difficult to find, and I think sometimes younger people maybe think, well, sure, why would I go looking or asking? Or there's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't. And I have found now, it's probably a symptom of the crisis in jobs, and with so many people now looking and planning their exit strategy from this country, that you do have more contact with people, say in between that sort of 17, 18 into the early 20s age group than would have been the case a couple of years back. But it's about younger people as well empowering themselves, because they've exactly the same right to lobby, to give out, to advise elected representatives as anybody else, and they should really take that up.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's anything that you said you've seen a growth? Is there any barriers there that you feel need to be broken down or anything like that maybe?
Do you know what I think the biggest barrier is? I think young people, and this isn't a phenomenon just for young people, but it's more broadly applicable, but see politics as something that's a bit alien, a bit of a yawn fest at times, and it is, let's be fair, and something that's kind of done by other people. Politics is nearly something that's done to you, rather than something that's there to serve you, and that's a cultural thing. And there isn't a simple solution as to how you break that down. I mean, one of my bugbears is we don't have enough women in any of these institutions. We certainly don't have enough young people in them, and that we need to fix that. We need to stop talking about it and lamenting it, and we need to do things that change it. So it's as much a mindset as anything else. So I just repeat, anybody is quite free to collar a minister or a TD or a senator, and they have exactly the same influence. You know, they have, if you're 18 and you're a voter, you've the same say as somebody who's in their 50s and is a voter. But we do have a problem in the culture of Irish politics that it's seen as something that kind of, if I can generalise, sort of middle-aged men in suits do. And that's just not something that necessarily appeals to younger people. You know, they feel that it's a space for somebody else.
And Jack asked, he's wondering, he's seen a lot of the people he's seen a lot of employers advocating a yes vote, and he's wondering if there's a negative to this, and he's wondering why a lot of employers are pushing for a yes vote.
Well, it's not unusual. I mean, I think treaty after treaty, our last big debate on these matters was Lisbon. Do you remember Lisbon 1 and 2? And at that time, the same employers who are out now were out advocating a yes vote on the basis of stability and jobs and so on. Unfortunately, in the period that followed the passage of the Lisbon Treaty, employment collapsed in the state, as it happened. So I'm not suggesting for a minute that those opinions were given in anything other than good faith, and these people are entitled to their view, but they were wrong. They were just wrong, and I believe that they're wrong on this occasion. I don't think it's helpful that the government is sort of banging the drum of, if we have a no vote, which I hope we do, that, you know, the sky will fall in, that investment will flee and all of that. A, because that's not true, and B, because government figures saying that in itself causes panic and destabilises things. So you have the ironic position where people who tell you they want stability and safety and all of this are making very menacing noises that are not helpful. You know, we should be free to have this vote freely, rationally, certainly with an eye on jobs and on the long term. And then the employers, I mean, the employers' bodies, a number of them are out, as Jack says, and they're calling for a yes vote. I can tell you, I know an awful lot of people who are in business, particularly in smaller businesses, and in the retail sector maybe in particular, who know for sure that if austerity continues, that their businesses are in big, big difficulty. Some of those voices have come out and made their position clear. They're not as organised as the Yes lobby, but that's not that unusual if you look at previous referendum campaigns. In any event, whoever says what, at the end of the day, voters have to trust their own instincts, in a sense, on these matters. And what we're saying to people is, take a look around you, view the evidence for yourself. The books aren't being balanced. The dole queues aren't being shortened. The debt burden remains with us. Others across the European Union are taking 2 steps back and saying, pushing the pause button, saying, hang on a second, if this isn't working, is it wise to continue with it? Others are saying this clearly isn't working and we need something different. So I'd say to people, trust your instinct too. Sometimes, you know, experts or corporate people or politicians even have their own analysis and view. People have to work from their own experiences as well. We're currently in a bailout arrangement with our colleagues from the Troika. So that's the European Commission, the European Central Bank and the IMF. The government has told us consistently we won't need a second bailout. They seem to be shifting ground on that, and they're saying that we might, and I accept, because of austerity policies, the chances are that we will need a second bailout. Let me say that up front. And then the controversy has arisen, well, in the event of that, if we vote no, will we be able to get emergency funding? And the categoric answer to that is yes, we will. The reason for that is because this emergency funding under this other treaty called the ESM that they're establishing is explicitly legally constituted and set up to serve stability within the euro. You can't get money from the fund unless the trouble that's happening in your country threatens the euro. That's the stated aim of it. And because we're part of the Eurozone and our economies and financial systems are so enmeshed with each other, a problem in Ireland is not just a problem in Ireland, it's a problem for the whole Eurozone and therefore for the euro. So there's just no political credibility in saying that European leaders will let us swing for the very simple reason that us going down the tubes causes them a huge difficulty and causes what they call contagion and market panic and all of that. That's the political reason. The legal reason why we'll get money is because legally that's why the fund has been established. And it's quite a complicated thing that they had to go through to establish it, but it involves a change to the European treaties, which we have to agree to. Now, we haven't done that yet. This fund is not yet established. And if the government are genuinely worried that there's something in that treaty that would exclude us in the event of a no vote, there's still plenty of time and plenty of opportunity to have that fixed. But for me, the bottom line is, and all of the evidence of the recent years, including the fact that the European Council on at least 2 occasions, and the European Council, as all the European leaders have said categorically, that irrespective of what happens, programme countries, that means us and Portugal, will be supported until they are match fit to go back to the market. So it's been a matter of controversy and debate and all the rest of it. I think it's important that people aren't panicked on that issue. And can I just say, I wouldn't be advocating so strongly a no vote if I genuinely thought for a second that the net result of it would be no emergency funding if we needed it. Of course, what we all want is to get out of the bailout and not to have ourselves at the mercy of any of these bailout mechanisms. Just
to follow on briefly from that, just the last kind of point on it, that Ireland has, with the ESM, you know, if we did end up agreeing to the ESM and work through that, we've responsibility to contribute 1.59%, which works at about 11 billion at the moment.
Yeah.
Where would we get that money from?
You see, now, aside from could we access it, there's a couple of other queries around it, like how much are we paying into it. The initial capital commitment from Ireland is just over 11 billion euro. That can increase. That would be at the discretion of the Board of Governors for it. So it's an open-ended thing, and it's a very fair question to ask, well, where are we getting the 11 billion? You don't have to pay it all in one. It's paid in tranches, you know, in instalments. It's a fair question. It's a question that the government in the first instance need to answer. I don't think they have so far. And the second thing is this, and this has kind of entered into the debate only very recently. The fund, it is proposed, will be to the tune of about 700 billion euro. There is now a view that that won't be enough. If Spain needs to be bailed out, if Cyprus, if other countries, if Italy get into difficulty, that will not be a sufficient amount of money to bail out, quote unquote, which brings me back to one of my initial points, which is around the issue of debt, because different European countries there's different reasons as to why they're in crisis. Maybe Spain mirrors Ireland most closely in terms of what went wrong, the construction bubble and all of that, the speculative bubble. We need to deal with the issue of debt. The Danish Prime Minister, do you remember when the Taoiseach was in Davos and he was asked, you know, so Mr. Kenny, what happened in Ireland? He said they went mad, borrowing and spending, and annoyed a lot of people because we know that's not what happened. But he was joined on the platform by the Danish Prime Minister, and she said, you know, what happened here was that banks were too big to fail and citizens were too small to matter. And for me, throughout this whole debate, she got it in one. That for me sums up what's happened, and we need to get ourselves now out of that, and that means dealing with the debt.